Hello, everyone. I'm Tyler Chrestman, and welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Today on the podcast, we are going to be getting in some trouble, which is normal for us. We're going to be talking about something that is popping up in mainstream media today. Should have been mainstream for the past 3 years, but is just now being talked about by some major news organizations today. And I'm not 100% sure if I'm allowed to talk about this. And what do I mean by that? I mean that for the past 3 years, talking about this subject has been something that would get you suspended from places like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. They would give you a strike against your account. They would suspend you. They would do all sorts of things if you even brought this topic up. And I am, of course, talking about the lab leak theory. Now, for those who don't know what that refers to, if you've been living in a hole for the past couple of years, the lab leak theory is the theory that the COVID-19 pandemic started from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, this big biomedical research facility in Wuhan, China, where the pandemic started. Now, it's been called a conspiracy theory. It's been said that it's been debunked. It's been all these things. But this week, there were some changes and some news came out from the Biden administration. And so now it's being talked about again, even though it hasn't been talked about in a while, except among any circles with common sense. I want to play for you, though, before we get into this. I want to play for you exactly what the media has been telling you for the past 3 years about this. So let's watch a little video here put out by good friends over at Fox News about what the media has been saying.
Classified intel reports saying that the U.S. Department of Energy has assessed that the source of the COVID-19 pandemic likely came from a China lab leak.
And then there's this theory, widely debunked. This paper from two Chinese researchers that says it's plausible that the virus leaked accidentally from one of two labs near the Wuhan seafood market.
Coronavirus was man-made in a lab in Wuhan, China. And yet this week, Donald Trump is still pushing the debunked bunkum, despite his own intelligence community's findings that is simply not true.
The Wuhan lab, we know that it's been debunked that this virus was man-made or modified or anything like that.
Tom Cotton a couple of days ago spouting a conspiracy theory that the Chinese made this virus up.
You have a lab in Wuhan.
In a lab, you have Rush Limbaugh every day, Presidential Medal, Freedom of Honor. It's hard to say this is the most reckless thing he's ever done.
Those same agencies now have been tapped with investigating one of Trump world's most favorite conspiracy theories. New York Times reports this, quote, senior Trump administration officials have pushed American spy agencies to hunt for evidence to support an unsubstantiated theory that a government lab in Wuhan, China was the origin of the coronavirus outbreak.
Tom Cotton, one of Donald Trump's staunchest allies in the Senate, suggested that the virus might have originated in a high-security biochemical lab in China. In the 1980s, I remember when the far left trafficked in rumors about HIV having been invented in CIA labs. The far right has now found its own virus conspiracy theory.
Okay, isn't that fun? So what the media did, my computer was a little laggy there. What the media has done for the past 3 years, most of those videos, for those of you who just listened to the audio, said that it was in 2020. Most of those videos were from 2020. What the media has done for the past 3 years is tell you that this has been debunked. This has been disproven. And that was 100% always false. This was never debunked. It was never disproven because we still can't say 100% definitively where the virus originated. And we're going to go through why that is in a moment. But to say that it's debunked has absolutely never been true. So every time they said that, every time they said it was debunked or disproven, they are lying because they didn't know where it came from, because we still don't know today. There is no definitive answer to that question today. Common sense and some of the facts that I'm going to lay out later in the video will show you that the lab leak makes the most sense. However, we don't know that definitively. So when they say it's debunked, when they say it's disproven, they are lying. They are knowingly lying, and That is important. They're not lying on accident. They are lying on purpose. They are lying for a reason. They are lying to carry water for the Chinese Communist Party. That is what they do. CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, YouTube, Facebook, the Washington Post, all of these places that claim to be against disinformation, they were more interested in protecting the Chinese Communist Party than they were in digging for the truth. And there's good reason for that. China is good business for a lot of these places. You think the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos does a tremendous amount of business with China. Do you think that he's going to allow the Washington Post to make China angry? No. He is a propagandist for the Chinese government that said, we didn't do this. They absolutely did. Everything they said was a lie. Now, that was the video. We also are going to pull up, I also have one more thing I wanted to show you before we get off of that. So this is what these places were saying. This is from an article from CNN that actually does a pretty good job. Maggie Haberman, I'm going to read it to you. Maggie Haberman of the New York Times pointed out that one of the reasons some reporters were quick to dismiss the lab leak theory was because former President Trump and his administration politicized the matter. Both suggested they had seen evidence that this was formed in a lab, and they also suggested it was not released on purpose, but they refused to release the evidence showing what it was. And so because of that, this made this instantly political, Haberman said. This doesn't mean it's not worth discussing, but she added that it is, quote, important to remember what happened because it's getting reframed in a way that's not true to what happened. So the big bad man, President Trump, made this political by saying that it happened in the lab, and that somehow made this political. Nonsense. It's just a nonsensical point, but it's what they are doing now to cover for their ineptitude. The corporate press is trying to cover up the fact that they are not journalists. They weren't interested in finding the truth. What they were interested in was the narrative. And the narrative said this was a pandemic that started in the wet market. And the corporate media was going to go along with that narrative because China is big business. And because everyone was interested in making it no one's fault. This is no one's fault. It just happened. And we're going to go along with the COVID narrative. The things that they got wrong, the corporate press for the past 3 years has done more harm to the American public than we could possibly imagine. It turns out, I'm reluctant to even say this because I know the last time I talked about this topic, YouTube gave me a strike. So, and 2 more strikes and they're going to take my channel down. It's nonsense. But you can't even talk about COVID. What are genuine facts? You can't even talk about it because our overlords at social media have determined that what I say is false. What I say is bad. They took down one of my episodes. You'll notice there's a gap in the Chrestman conversation just on YouTube. Spotify didn't do it. Facebook didn't do it, but YouTube did. YouTube took down one of my videos because they said it was misinformation, despite the fact that I was quoting. All I did in that thing was quote studies from major outlets, major universities, and what they were saying, and somehow I am accused of disinformation. But anyway, the things that the corporate media got wrong, without going into details, the things that they got wrong, they were wrong about masks. They were wrong about vaccine mandates. They were wrong about transmission rates. They were wrong about the effectiveness of closing schools. They were wrong about social distancing. They were wrong about their quarantine procedures. They have been wrong about everything. Everything that the corporate press pushed, the entire COVID narrative, is nonsense. The effectiveness of boosters. They've been wrong about that. There was a study out, off the top of my head, I can't remember where I remember just hearing about this the other day. There was a study out that said that boosters for people who are older are great. They work. The COVID vaccine is very effective for people over the age of 60. Anyone young and healthy, there is almost zero data that shows that it had any effect on hospitalizations and death among anyone young and healthy. There is no data that supports that. And yet, the corporate media wants to push booster shots on children. Insanity. And so the corporate press just gets everything wrong, and this lab leak is just the crystallization of that. They couldn't have been more wrong to dismiss it. And yet, here they sit, and they still want to tell you that they are the guarders of truth. It is just not true. The lab leak should have been common sense. And there's no reason to say that it's political. There is no reason. I've been saying this for 3 years at this point. It is so obvious that it came from the lab. And we're going to go through exactly why that is. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's not a right-wing talking point. This should have been common sense. Finding the origin of the pandemic was actually very important. It's a very important thing that we have now missed the opportunity to do, mostly because China obstructed, as we're going to go through. But I want to walk through exactly what 3 years ago we knew as fact. It's not that this just came out, but we knew all these facts years ago, and yet the corporate press was interested in dismissing this story. So here are some facts for you that are just super fun. 1, the Wuhan Institute of Virology was studying coronaviruses, specifically coronaviruses that come from bats. Everyone agrees on this. This is a fact. The Wuhan Institute of Virology had been known to violate safety standards, and there are emails that date back years about fears that this place could be the source of a worldwide pandemic. In 2017, the Wuhan Institute of Virology constructed and characterized novel SARS-like coronaviruses at a biosafety level 2, a biosafety level that is inadequate for work with enhanced pandemic-level pathogens and patently inadequate to contain a virus having transmission properties of a SARS-CoV-2 virus. In 2017 to 2018, the Wuhan Institute of Virology constructed a novel chimeric SARS-like coronavirus that was able to infect and replicate in human airway cells and that had 10,000 times enhanced viral growth and 4 times enhanced lethality in mice, engineered to display human receptors on cells. Also in 2008, in a DARPA grant proposal, the Wuhan Institute of Virology and collaborators proposed to construct novel consensus bat SARS-like coronaviruses and to insert FCS furin cleavage sites sequences at the spike gene S1, S2, at the spike gene S1, S2 border of bat SARS-like coronaviruses. So this is a proposal that they made where they were going to insert those, what they called the spike genes, into these sites. Now, this is just a proposal. We don't know that they did it. However, this is exactly what the pandemic virus, SARS-CoV-2, looks like when you examine it. And they were proposing that this was something they were interested in studying. The Wuhan Institute of Virology, the bats that they were studying there, are from 900 miles away. There's 1,000 kilometers away that these bats are naturally located. Okay? So the bat that they know that the coronavirus originated from is not native to Wuhan. It is 1,000 kilometers away. However, the Wuhan Institute of Virology is only 300 yards away from the wet market where they say that the bat came from. That the pandemic originated in the wet market, which was the going theory. The Wuhan Institute of Virology, 300 yards away. The bat that the virus came from, 1,000 kilometers away. Okay? In November of 2019, 3 people from the Wuhan Institute of Virology were hospitalized with an illness that now, looking back, resembled COVID. The spouse of someone who worked in the lab actually died of this illness. This is in November, before there was a pandemic. After the pandemic outbreak, the director of the Wuhan Institute of Virology put in an email to a colleague and asked the question, quote, could this have come from our lab? The leader of the institute itself was worried that the pandemic originated in his lab. And now, for what is the most damning piece of evidence, the Wuhan Institute of Virology destroyed all of their research samples after the pandemic started. Why would they do this? Why did the Wuhan Institute of Virology feel it necessary to destroy all the samples, all the working samples in their lab before any investigators arrived to check them, to investigate them, to do anything? They destroyed all the samples. And yet, we're supposed to, what, take the Chinese government at their word? That everything was hunky-dory? That everything was on the up and up? It was all above board? This is nonsense. And the media did a terrible job at trying to actually hold China accountable for the millions of people who died because of the pandemic that started in their country under their watch. And I think a lot of our government officials, like Dr. Fauci, who played a role in funding the gain-of-function research that took place at that institute, were interested in covering their role for all the death that happened worldwide. Dr. Fauci has done a tremendous amount of damage, more damage than probably any bureaucrat in history, and yet people love him. It makes no sense. It makes no sense to me. Now, all these things can be true at once, that this is China's fault, and they lied about it. And at the same time, some of the people who are saying this is a weapon, this was not a weapon. I don't believe it was designed to be a weapon. It's not a bioweapon. It wasn't anything like that. What this was a Chernobyl. This was China's Chernobyl. What happened in Chernobyl was a nuclear reactor run away, and everyone knows the story, at least partly. And what this was the fact that in communist countries, they are inadequately prepared to deal with hardships that they encounter. They were doing things that they shouldn't have done in that lab because they decided to do it. And there were no safety precautions in place, and this ran away with them, a lot like it did in Chernobyl under the Soviet Union. And I don't think this was done intentionally. China would not be stupid enough, I don't think, to release a weapon in their own country. This did tremendous damage to China's worldwide reputation, their economy, as well as their country just in general. It has not been a good thing for China, and it's not a very effective weapon in reality, because the way the world responded to it could not have been anticipated. It was not as though China expected the world to go into this terrible overreaction the way that it did. It was just sloppiness. It was sloppiness in a lab that was known to be sloppy. And there's a lot wrong with that, and China should have to pay some sort of reparations to the world, but it will never happen because we wasted time, and we'll never get to the bottom of it now. We'll never know definitively because China obstructed the entire way, and the corporate media carried their water and allowed them to do it. The corporate press gives cover to the worst actors in the world. They do it on a routine basis. They do it for China all the time. They're quick to write off. They're quick to write off the bad things that China does while talking about how everything in America is terrible all the time. It's nonsense. There was a guy, I wonder, hold on here. Give me one quick moment. Oh, we didn't even talk about these other two things that I just wanted to hit real quick. We're talking about the corporate press. So, Apoorva Mandavali, this is a reporter for the New York Times. They still, to this day, have her on the daily podcast whenever they're talking about COVID. This person who said, here's a quote, "Someday we will stop talking about the lab leak theory and maybe even admit its racist roots, but alas, the day is not yet here." The New York Times, man, I got a little something in my throat. The New York Times, one of their lead reporters on the pandemic, said it was racist. It was racist to talk about how bad about the lab leak theory. And it was clearly it was just anti-Asian to talk about it. Not nonsense. How about an MSNBC contributor, Mehdi Hassan, who said, quote, "The simple reason why so many people weren't keen to discuss the lab leak theory is because it was originally conflated by the right with Chinese bioweapon conspiracies and continues to be conflated by the right with anti-Fauci conspiracies. Blame the conspiracy theorists." Oh, so the media didn't do its job because it's the right wing's fault? The right wing said that the lab leak could be true and Fauci might play a role in that they were wondering if it was a weapon that the Chinese were designing. And so because of that, they just had to dismiss him because, oh, no, that couldn't be true. None of that could be true. So it was actually responsible journalism to not discuss it. That's Mehdi Hassan. He contributes to MSNBC. He has a whole show. And those are the journalists that we're supposed to trust. Those are the people that we're supposed to put our faith in to tell you the truth. No, these are not good people. That's not a good excuse. It's not a good or interesting take. It just makes you look bad. And yet he thinks that he is the moral person. He's the moral person who knows what's best. And it was those bad conspiracy theorists. That's why the lab leak didn't get discussed, because the conspiracy theorists who were right about the lab leak said that there could be a lab leak. And because they're on the right, that means they're wrong. And so we didn't talk about it. What a moron. That guy's a dummy. He's a dum-dum. That is just, it doesn't make any sense. But yet in his mind, he was doing the noble journalistic thing of not looking into it. It's just ridiculous. The media is not your friend. And this is not picking on just MSNBC and CNN and the New York Times, which they're all bad. The New York Times, by the way, I read the New York Times. I listen to the New York Times podcast. I think there's a lot of good information that they have. They're obviously biased, but they do a good job of reporting on the facts. Now, you have to know going in that the facts are going to have a left-wing bias. And I'm okay with that. I know that. And so I can read it, and I can separate off when I read what is fact and what is opinion. I know the difference because this is something that I'm interested in, and I know how to read something like the New York Times. The New York Times does good reporting on certain topics, and on other topics, they are just a Democratic left-wing propaganda network. So I'm not here to just dump all over all the press. But what they do that's wrong is that they don't acknowledge this. And they pretend that they have some sort of semblance of objectivity. It's not true. Now, you can see this on Fox News, too. Fox News has some good reporters, and Fox News also has their talking heads that do right-wing propaganda. It's like that everywhere. That's just the way it is. But they want to say Fox News is bad. No. MSNBC and CNN are bad. CNN is the worst. And Fox News can be bad. There are some good journalists at Fox News. There are a couple I like on CNN. I actually like Fareed Zakaria. I think he's got some interesting stuff to say sometimes. I think he's wrong about a lot of things, and he would probably think I'm wrong about a lot of things. But I think he does good work, and I think he tells the truth, which makes him good in my opinion. Not everyone on these networks is bad, but the networks are bad. And that is important to remember, that these people are not looking out for your best interest. These people are pushing a narrative because they're owned by someone, and their show is not out there to tell you the truth. Their show is to make money for a network, and that network doesn't care about you. That network cares that you watch their show. They'll tell you what they want. They'll tell you what they want you to know and what they want you to hear, and they'll try and do it in an entertaining way so you watch their show. That's what they're interested in. They're not interested in the truth. Otherwise, the lab leak would have been treated like the wet market. It would have been said, journalists would have said, we need to look into it. And if right-wing people said, hey, then we believe this, then they would have said, yeah, there might be something to that. We should look into it. We don't have the facts. We don't know. Instead, what they did, they didn't do that. They didn't say, well, these people are pretending to know and we don't know. They said, no, they're wrong. They're wrong. They're on the right wing and they're wrong. It's been debunked. We know for a fact it didn't happen. They didn't know. And that's where the problem lies. The problem lies in pretending to know everything you don't. I laid out the things that we know. These are things that we knew. I can't say it came from a lab. I can say my common sense thinks it dictates that it probably did. But I don't know that. I just laid out the facts in the case that I make to say why I believe that it did. But I can't tell you I know. They told you it didn't. They said they know it didn't. They're liars when they do that. When they pretend to know, they're lying. And that's the difference between the corporate press and people who will tell you the truth. People who will tell you the truth, the most common thing you should hear from someone who wants to tell you the truth is the phrase, I don't know. Because that is the truth most of the time. Most of us don't know most things most of the time. There's very few things in this world that I know. That is as good a fact to know about yourself as anything. If you walk around and you think you know the answers to things, I have opinions. I have opinions on lots of stuff, but I don't have all the answers. MSNBC will tell you they have the answers. CNN will tell you they have the answers. The New York Times will tell you they have the answers, and if you question their answers, you're a racist. That's what the New York Times will do. But I don't know. I don't know the answers. I just laid out the case. You lay out the case, and you let people make their own decisions, and you try and lead them where you think the truth lies. I think the truth lies in this. I have said this for 3 years because it makes sense to me. That there's no coincidence that says that a biolab studying coronaviruses happened to just coincidentally be located within a golf ball's drive from the place that a pandemic started. That, to me, is a coincidence that screams, investigate me. I just, call me crazy, which they did. Call me crazy and a conspiracy theorist, but the Institute of Virology is located right next to the origin of the pandemic, maybe we should look into it. Did not seem crazy to me even 3 years ago. Anyway, I'm rambling now. But the point of this whole thing is that what they say today is untrue. What the corporate press says today is untrue, or a conspiracy theory, or the fringe. The difference between that and the truth is 6 months, is a year. They say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. Well, and then 6 months later they go, well, you know, they still were wrong at the time to think that. Just wait. Everything that these people, they don't have your best interest at heart. That's the takeaway. That is really the takeaway. The corporate press does not have your best interest at heart. All right, I'm rambling. We've already gone 25 minutes. I'm going to get off here. People, like, comment, share, do all that good stuff. And most importantly, leave me some questions. I love answering questions on here. I haven't been getting enough of them recently. We've had a little downturn in the question asking. I love questions. Ask away. We will answer them at the end of the show. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for the day. I'm Tyler Chrestman. I'll catch you on the next episode.